Welcome back to another segment of ACRP TV. Our spotlight today is on our decentralized trials here to stay. It's a $24,000 question here. Our guest is Melissa Easy, who's the Vice President of R&D Technologies at IQVIA. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So before we jump in and talk about decentralized trials, I wonder if you could define them for me. You know, it's one of those terms where it gets tossed around a lot. Sometimes people are talking about hybrid trials when they actually mean decentralized, depending on your terminology. So, what do you mean when you say decentralized trials?
So for me, it's interesting. Every time a customer wishes to talk about a decentralized trial, the first thing we have to do is define it. And I think that every company is defining it differently. So it's a really great question, and that we really should not make any assumptions. So for me personally, taking into account what our customers are saying, what do they mean, is really broad. So it could be a hybrid trial. It could be 100% virtual trial. So anything that is not just that traditional study that is solely being run out of an investigator's office or, hospital, to me now starts to capture a decentralized trial.
Now, as I mentioned at the second ago at the outset, the title of this segment is Our Decentralized Trials Here to Stay, and I said $24,000 question. I think it's more like $64,000 or more. But do you think, it's nice to imagine 2021 maybe ultimately being a more calm year, relatively speaking, and COVID mitigated, et cetera. Assuming that happens, particularly say the second half of the year, do you see us as an industry perhaps reverting back to form and going, not being so excited or using these decentralized technologies as much, or are they here to stay?
I believe they're here to stay, but I don't know if it's quite at the capacity and scale of which we're seeing right now with the COVID studies. If we just for a minute think about the vaccine studies, the actual scale and the volume of patients that have had to be put through in a time where we're really trying to limit how much we are together, we have gone to the vast extreme. And I don't believe we're going to stay quite as extreme as we are today. I think we're going to revert back a little, but I've been joining a number of operational roundtables with sponsors of all sorts of sizes and have been asking this very question myself. And I believe that this has fast forwarded us maybe by a few years. A lot of people were piloting technologies and COVID forced them to actually put them and make them a reality. And so I think now people are actually challenging themselves for studies they're planning in the future and saying, should we be using decentralized components or technologies for this study, or does it make sense to be more traditional? Should it be a hybrid? Where should it land given the protocol? And I do think that people believe technology is going to be much more prevalent in all studies. If I look at e-consent, for an example, prior to COVID, there was a lot of interest in e-consent, and people fell into a few buckets. One was bucket of customers and sponsors who were already wanting and really believed in the quality aspects and the visibility and audit trails that e-consent brings. Others were more sort of very interested in consent, but would say, sell it to me. You explain to me why I should be doing consent. And it was that bucket that was already thinking about it that I think have just leaped. And then there are those that just believe that because of regulators and things, we're not there with e-consent. Whereas during COVID, we've even seen regulators in many countries change sort of the rules and relax it a little around many of these technologies. So I really do believe that we are going to be a much more modern, non-traditional going forward. But where we land on that scale is yet to be seen.
Now, you and I have had the chance to talk a bit in the past, and I know in the right conditions, you're a big proponent of decentralized trials in the right situations. But you have raised, there's always issues with anything new and new technologies. And I know that you've had some interesting thoughts about payment issues.
Yes.
Decentralized trials raised. Talk a little bit about that.
So I mean, even when COVID started, there were studies that were ongoing, and then some studies got put on hold. Some studies only got put on hold for new recruitment. They kept going, but even those that continued, and even those that were just about to start, they had to shift and change. So there were many amendments, and what we actually saw with payments is that we were being asked to really speed up payments because sites only have very limited cash supplies, and so we needed to really start to think about how we could support sites. And then we had to think about, well, what is fair market value of doing a particular activity remotely versus in person? Is it going to take them longer? Is it going to be shorter? What else are we now asking sites to do? We with COVID saw so many amendments, it was crazy. And a number of people also had been sort of having holdbacks where they don't give the sites all of the money until the study's actually finished. It's almost like a bonus payment at the end for work that they've already done. And we saw that all customers were wanting us to release those immediately. And we also saw, in particular in the US, people had still been requesting a lot of checks at sites, whereas with COVID, we saw that people actually started wanting electronic payments. And again, it just makes it more important to give them visibility into what each payment is for, where people should have the technology in place to be able to do that. So it's just been an interesting little tweak that, payments have always been important, but they've become more important.
Fantastic. We really appreciate your time here. This has been our ACRP TV Spotlight, asking the question, are decentralized trials here to stay? And the tentative answer looks to be yes. Our guest has been Melissa Easy, who's the Vice President of R&D Technologies at IQVIA. Melissa, thank you again so much for joining us today.
And thank you, Michael, for having me.